Jade Sea had been calm that morning. Sailors aboard a Myrish merchant vessel later swore to it. Flat water, clear sky, the kind of morning that made men believe the gods were in good humor. They had been 2 days east of Dragonstone, running cargo south when the sky cracked open, not with lightning, not with storm, with something that had no name in any language spoken between the shivering sea and the summer isles, a sound like the world being torn in two, a pressure wave that flattened the ship's sails and drove every man to his knees, and then light. A column of white-blue radiance punching through the atmosphere from a height no bird had ever flown, trailing fire that wasn't fire, leaving a scar across the clouds that took 3 hours to fade. And inside that column, enormous, gray-hulled, impossibly vast, a thing shaped like a blade turned sideways, descending, the merchant captain. A practical Myrish man named Orvin, who'd survived 2 sea storms and a pirate raid, looked at what was descending from the heavens and immediately ordered his crew to row. Direction didn't matter, just away. He would spend the rest of his life describing what he'd seen, and no one would fully believe him. But he was not alone in witnessing it. From the walls of Dragonstone, from fishing boats off Blackwater Bay, from the towers of King's Landing itself, thousands of eyes turned skyward as the UNSC Infinity entered the atmosphere of a world it had never been meant to find. On the bridge of the Infinity, every console was screaming. Commander Sarah Palmer's voice cut through the noise with practiced precision, snapping orders across departments as her crew fought to stabilize a ship that had just been dragged through a Forerunner slipspace anomaly with 0 warning and 0 preparation. 3 seconds ago, they had been in transit near Reach's debris field. Now the viewport showed an alien sky. Blue, familiar in color but wrong in every other way, wrapped around a planet with coastlines that matched no database in the UNSC's archives. No satellite infrastructure, no comm traffic, no transponder signals, no energy signatures consistent with human or Covenant technology. Roland, the ship's AI, materialized on the holotable beside Palmer's station. His avatar, a young man in a vintage flight suit, looked considerably less composed than usual. Slipspace event was not generated by our drives, he said, already processing. Forerunner in origin based on the energy signature, but the geometry is wrong. It didn't behave like a portal. It behaved more like a current, as if something pulled us through rather than opened a door. Can we go back? Not immediately. The event horizon has collapsed. We're looking at minimum, 72 hours before I can even model a re-entry equation, and that's assuming the physics on the other side are cooperative. He paused. They may not be. Palmer looked at the viewport. The planet below was undeniably Earth-like. Green, blue, populated based on thermal readings. Medieval-level development based on the absence of any electromagnetic radiation consistent with industrialization. She took a breath that she didn't let become a sigh and turned to the communication station. "Get me the Master Chief." John 117 was in the armory when the call came. He'd been running diagnostics on his Mjolnir systems, a habit ingrained so deep it required no conscious thought. When the Infinity had lurched, when the slipspace event had detonated around them like a silent bomb, he'd grabbed a bulkhead and held, felt the wrongness of the transition in his bones, and said nothing. The Spartans didn't speculate, they assessed. By the time he reached the bridge, Roland had already compiled a preliminary planetary survey. The holotable displayed a continent, vast, roughly boot-shaped, surrounded by ocean, with a second larger landmass to the east, separated by a narrow sea. Thermal imaging showed population clusters consistent with pre-industrial civilization, fortified structures, large concentrations of livestock. what appeared to be a walled city of considerable size on the southern coast of the primary continent, with a massive fortification on an island nearby. Population estimate? Chief asked. Difficult to pinpoint without better sensor resolution, Roland said, but the primary continent alone, somewhere between 40 and 60 million. Dense for a pre-industrial world. And Chief, Roland highlighted a section of the northern continent where the thermal imaging showed something anomalous. A vast cold front moving south, but moving wrong. Not like weather, like an advancing force. Whatever that is up north, it's not natural. The temperature differential is too sharp, too uniform. It's being generated or driven. Chief looked at the northern readings for a long moment. Then he looked at the cities in the south. Are we visible to them? Undeniably, Roland said. We descended through their atmosphere at low altitude to stabilize. Half that continent watched us come down. We're currently holding position at 4,000 meters above sea level, approximately 40 kilometers east of that large island fortification. I'd say we have, conservatively, about 12 hours before the local leadership either attempts contact or attempts an attack. They don't have anything that can threaten the ship, Palmer said. No, Chief agreed, but if we stay passive, we lose the initiative. He studied the map, the island fortress, the walled city, the cold thing moving south from the top of the world. Roland, what's your read on the northern anomaly, pace of advancement? Roland pulled up a time-lapse composite assembled from their first hour of observation. At current pace, it reaches the primary population centers within weeks, maybe less. And Chief, the imaging is showing something in front of that cold front that I can't classify. Moving bodies, enormous numbers. Not consistent with any living army formation I have data on. He let that sit. They're not generating heat signatures. The bridge went quiet. Palmer looked at Chief. Chief looked at the map. Get a Pelican ready, he said. I'm going down. If you want to see more crossover stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character or a universe you'd want to see collide with a world they were never meant to enter. Leave it in the comments below. The Pelican descended through cloud cover as the sun fell toward the western horizon, and Dragonstone rose from the sea below like a clenched fist of black stone. Chief had reviewed everything Roland could pull from atmospheric and optical scans during the 20-minute flight. Medieval fortification, island position, defensible but isolated, the largest concentration of organized military structure within immediate range of their holding position, which made it the logical first contact point. He wasn't here to conquer. He wasn't here to intimidate. He was here because 72 hours was a long time to be a mystery to a pre-industrial civilization, and mysteries had a tendency to become threats in the absence of information. He came in low, used the Pelican's exterior light sparingly, and sat down on the rocky shore outside the castle's primary gate, just as the last daylight died. The welcoming party was not warm. The 40 men in plate armor and half capes poured out of the gate with torches and drawn swords, and Chief watched them from the Pelican's ramp with the patience of a man who had faced down Covenant warships. They were brave. He'd give them that. Looking up at a gray-armored giant nearly 7 feet tall in a machine that had descended from the sky and not breaking, that required something. He raised one hand, open palm, the universal gesture that preceded every first contact protocol in the UNSC handbook. The soldiers held their formation. Swords stayed drawn. Then a figure pushed through them, a woman, dark-haired, composed in a way that reminded Chief of officers he'd respected. She wore no armor, only dark riding clothes, and she looked at him, the way a tactician looks at an unknown variable, not with fear, but with calculation. "You came from the sky," she said. Her language was not English. Roland, feeding through Chief's helmet comm, was already processing. Had been processing since they'd first detected audio communication from the planet's surface, running comparative linguistic models against every human language in his database. The match wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was close enough for a working framework, and Roland's real-time translation filled Chief's earpiece half a second after her words reached him. "Yes," Chief said. Roland converted it. The woman's eyes flickered. She'd heard something come from his helmet, understood it was a translation device, and adapted to that reality in approximately 2 seconds. Smart. "And the great ship, that is yours. I serve aboard it." She studied him. The torchlight didn't penetrate his visor, and he knew she found that unsettling. Speaking to a helmet, to a reflection of her own fire. "I am Daenerys Targaryen," she said. "This is my castle and my island. What are you?" Roland translated. But Chief processed the name against nothing. It existed in no database he could reference. He filed it as significant anyway. "My name is Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, UNSC Navy." He paused, letting Roland work. "We didn't come here intentionally. We're stranded. We need time and cooperation to find our way home. In exchange..." He looked north, past the castle walls, past the sea, toward the vast cold thing Roland had flagged on the thermal scans. "I think we may be able to help you with what's coming." Daenerys Targaryen said nothing for a long moment. The torches crackled. The sea worked against the rocks below. "Come inside," she said finally. "There is much to discuss." Chief looked back at the Pelican, signaled the pilot to hold position, and followed her through the gate of Dragonstone, into a world that had never imagined anything like him, and into a crisis that was already far beyond anything it could survive alone. The war room of Dragonstone had been built for dragons, not literally, but everything about it suggested a civilization that had designed its spaces around the assumption of overwhelming power. The painted table dominated the chamber, a massive carved map of the continent, rendered in wood and pigment. The coastlines and mountain ranges worn smooth by generations of hands tracing campaigns that had shaped kingdoms. Candles burned in iron brackets along the walls. The stone breathed cold. And around that table, watching Chief with expressions that ranged from barely contained terror to barely contained ambition, stood the inner council of the last Targaryen claimant to the Iron Throne. Tyrion Lannister was the first to speak after Chief ducked through the doorway and straightened to his full height inside the chamber. "Well," the small man said from his position near the head of the table, a cup of wine held with the careful steadiness of someone choosing not to show surprise. "I've sat through stranger councils, though I'll admit, not many." Roland was running continuous translation through Chief's earpiece, language models sharpening with every exchange. The gap between comprehension and precision was narrowing fast. Within an hour, it would be workable. Within 6, it would be reliable. Chief filed that as an asset and turned his attention to the room. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, composed, watching him with those calculating eyes. Beside her, a man built like a castle wall, gray-bearded, scarred, a soldier's posture so ingrained it had become his resting state, Lord Commander Jorah Mormont and others. A red-haired woman in robes that made Roland flag an anomalous energy, reading Chief tucked away for later, advisors, commanders. A room full of people with competing agendas trying to decide simultaneously whether he was a weapon, a god, or a problem. He understood that dynamic. Chief set his helmet on the table, a deliberate choice, a gesture of openness that the UNSC First Contact Protocol recommended when dealing with non-hostile indigenous populations. The room reacted, seeing his face, scarred, human, unremarkable in every way except the eyes, seemed to disturb them more than the helmet had. They'd been prepared for something alien. A man was harder to categorize. "Tell me about what's coming from the north," Chief said. The Night King, an army of the dead, whites, risen corpses, bodies animated by something the people of this world called magic, and that Roland, after 40 minutes of absorbing everything Daenerys and her council could explain, classified more cautiously as an unknown energy phenomenon with necromantic properties and no analog in any UNSC or Forerunner database. The White Walkers led them, ancient, possibly created from what little mythology could be extracted from Melisandre's fragmented and heavily interpreted knowledge. Moving south with a dead army that grew larger with every battle because every enemy killed became a soldier. No logistics, no supply lines, no attrition. A military force that operated outside every conventional warfare assumption Chief had ever been trained against. He listened without interrupting. Tyrion watched him listen, and Chief noted the intelligence in that observation. The small man was reading his reactions, cataloging them, building an assessment in real time. A strategist, possibly the sharpest mind in the room, despite his obvious effort to appear otherwise. When Daenerys finished, Chief looked at the painted table, at the north, at the thing called the Wall, 700 feet of ice and ancient magic, crumbling if the reports from the last Raven were accurate, perhaps already breached. "How large is the army?" he asked. "Hundreds of thousands," Daenerys said. "Perhaps more. They've had generations to accumulate." "What kills them?" "Dragonglass." She gestured to the island they stood on. Beneath Dragonstone, Roland had already flagged massive obsidian deposits in the geological scan, and Valyrian steel and dragonfire. "You have dragons." "2. A shadow crossed her face. "I had 3. Chief noted the grief and moved past it, with the directness that was not coldness, but necessity. "What's the defensive strategy for the primary population centers?" Tyrion answered that one. "Currently, pray. The great lords are too busy maneuvering for the throne to accept that the dead are coming." He swirled his wine. "We've been trying to convince them for months. The evidence hasn't been sufficiently persuasive." Chief looked at him. "Would footage be persuasive?" Tyrion blinked. "What?" Roland had been recording since the Pelican touched down. Continuous optical and thermal feed. The archived high resolution, including the northern scans showing the dead army's advance, the cold front, the sheer geometric scale of the threat rendered in data that left nothing to interpretation or mythology. Chief pulled the feed through his helmet's projector and put it on the wall of the war room. A crisp, impossible image of the army of the dead advancing across snow-covered ground, seen from 4,000 meters above sea level, every individual unit visible, the scale laid bare. The room stopped breathing. Jorah Mormont, who had seen the dead walk and had never fully lost the soldier's habit of controlling his reactions, put both hands flat on the table. Tyrion set down his wine for the first time. Daenerys looked at the image for a long moment. Then she looked at Chief. "How did you—" "My ship has been observing since we arrived. We can track that army in real time, from the air, without them knowing." He let that sit. "Information is the first advantage. We can tell you exactly where they are, exactly how fast they're moving, exactly where they'll hit first. No more guessing." "That alone," Tyrion said quietly, "is worth more than an army." But the world didn't hold still while Dragonstone recalibrated. By the following dawn, Roland was tracking 12 separate fast-moving parties on the mainland. Cavalry, ravens, these signal fires, all converging their attention toward the coordinates where the Infinity hung in the sky and the Pelican had been observed descending. The great houses of Westeros were not passive in the face of unknowns. They were predators, and an unknown power source descending from heaven looked exactly like an opportunity to every lord who'd spent a lifetime hunting advantages in a zero-sum game for a metal chair. The first uninvited contact came from the sea. A fleet, Greyjoy longships, based on their profile in Roland's registry, built from Daenerys's descriptions, running hard toward Dragonstone from the west. Not a full war fleet, but a scouting force large enough to be a statement. Euron Greyjoy had watched the Infinity descend from his flagship's deck, and where other lords saw a threat or a miracle, he saw a prize. Chief was back on the Infinity when Roland flagged the approach. 23 vessels, Roland reported, closing at approximately 9 knots. They'll be in visual range of the Pelican's holding position in 40 minutes. My read, this is a capture attempt. They want to board the smaller vessel and take it as a demonstration of power and capability. Let them get close, Chief said. Palmer looked at him from across the bridge. Chief, no weapons, just close. I want to see what they do when the options narrow. He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Greyjoy was a factor that needed to be addressed, but more importantly, the how he was addressed would set the tone for every subsequent contact with this world's power structures. Destroy the fleet and every lord on the continent would fear him. Let it approach and turn it away, and he demonstrated restraint and capability simultaneously. The longships got within 2 kilometers of the Pelican's position before Roland activated the Infinity's exterior floodlights. Night had fallen again, and lit the enormous warship from stem to stern across the sky above them. 450 meters of UNSC naval engineering made visible in the dark. At that range, from the deck of a longship, the Infinity didn't look like a ship. It looked like a second sky. The fleet stopped rowing. Roland opened external speakers, not a weapon, just sound, and broadcast a low-frequency tone across the water. Not threatening, just present. The infrasound equivalent of a hand on a shoulder. The Greyjoy fleet held position for 11 minutes. Then they turned west and rowed hard, and didn't stop. They'll report back, Roland said. Within a week, every major house will know you exist. Good, Chief said. The complication he hadn't anticipated came from the south. A raven reached Dragonstone the following afternoon. Tyrion brought it to Chief personally, which Chief noted as a significant gesture from a man who had survived by carefully controlling what he shared and with whom. The raven was from King's Landing, from Cersei Lannister, and its message was not to Daenerys. It was addressed in language that Roland had to work to translate given its oblique phrasing to the Sky God. Tyrion read it aloud, tone carefully neutral. She writes that whatever fell from the heavens is clearly beyond the understanding of lesser men, that gods deserve proper reverence and proper thrones, that King's Landing offers sanctuary, alliance, and the loyalty of the greatest city in Westeros, in exchange for the Sky God's guarantee of her reign. Chief looked at the raven scroll, at the official seal pressed into the wax. She's trying to recruit me, he said. She's trying to own you, Tyrion corrected quietly. Those are different things, and my sister has never fully understood the distinction. He set the scroll on the table. The question is, what do you do with it? Chief thought about the northern scans, about the dead army moving south at a pace that made politics irrelevant, about a world that was going to be consumed from the top down, while its surviving leaders maneuvered for a throne that would mean nothing if the dead reached it first. I respond, he said. I tell her I'm listening. Tyrion smiled for the first time since they'd met. Not the performative smile Chief had already learned to recognize, but a genuine one, brief and unguarded. You understand this world better than you should, for someone who arrived 3 days ago. I've dealt with factions before, Chief said. The politics change, the dynamics don't. He picked up the scroll, looked at the seal, and set it back down. Cersei Lannister wanted to own a weapon she didn't understand. The Night King was marching with an army she couldn't stop. And somewhere north of the wall, whatever had created the White Walkers was still there, still patient, still driving its dead hosts south through the cold. Chief had 72 hours before Roland's slipspace model would be ready. 72 hours that were already gone. He looked at the painted table, at the north, at the south, at the narrow sea between. Get me a full strategic overlay, he told Roland through his earpiece. Every defensive position, every population center, every choke point between the wall and King's Landing. And get me a direct line to the Infinity. I need Spartan teams briefed and ready to deploy. Roland's response was immediate and dry. Already compiled, awaiting your authorization. Chief authorized it and walked back to the war room window, looking north across the black water. 72 hours had become a luxury he no longer believed in. The wall fell on the 41st hour. Roland flagged it at 0300 ship time, a thermal event so massive it registered as a geological anomaly before his systems recalibrated and understood what they were actually seeing. The ice structure, 700 feet of it, ancient and reinforced by whatever magic had built it, came down in a section 3 miles wide near the Eastern Passage. Not crumbling, not eroding, collapsing, as if something had simply decided it was done being an obstacle. The cold front surged through the gap like water through a broken dam, and behind it, visible in the Infinity's high-resolution thermal imaging, even from 4,000 meters, the dead army poured south in numbers that made every previous estimate feel optimistic. Chief was on the bridge in 4 minutes. He stood at the holotable and looked at what Roland was showing him without speaking for a long moment. Palmer stood beside him. The Spartan team leaders were patched in through secure comm. Nobody said anything because the image said everything. A tide of bodies, hundreds of thousands deep, moving with the mechanical relentlessness of a force that didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't slow for terrain or weather, or the difference between day and night. Leading them, visible as cold signatures that Roland's sensors could track but not fully classify, the White Walkers moved like generals, precise, deliberate, and at their center, a presence that registered on every sensor the Infinity carried as something that shouldn't exist, a cold so absolute it bent the thermal readings around it like gravity bent light. The Night King. Time to first population contact at current pace, Chief said. 31 hours to the nearest fortified settlement south of the wall, Roland said. 18 hours to the village clusters that aren't fortified at all. A pause. Chief, I need to flag something. The energy phenomenon driving the reanimation of those bodies. I've been modeling it since we arrived, and I have a working theory. Go. It's not magic in any mystical sense. It's a field, a generated field emanating from a central source, the Night King, based on his position and the geometry of the effect. The whites aren't independently animated, they're connected to him. He's running a distributed system. Every soldier in that army is essentially a node. And he's the processor. Roland let that land. Which means if you take out the processor, the network collapses, Chief said. Theoretically. I want to be clear that this is extrapolation from limited data, not confirmed science. But the pattern is consistent every time I run the model. Chief looked at the thermal image of the Night King moving at the center of his army, so protected on every side by tens of thousands of dead soldiers and half a dozen White Walkers who functioned as a command layer. Untouchable by conventional medieval forces, potentially untouchable by dragons alone, Daenerys had already lost one to him, and the reports suggested he'd brought it back. But conventional medieval forces weren't what the UNSC had brought to this world. "Palmer," Chief said, "I need the Infinity repositioned. Northern theater, low enough for Pelican deployment, high enough to stay out of whatever that cold field does to our systems at close range." "Already calculating the flight path," Palmer said. She hadn't asked for justification. That was one of the things Chief had always respected about her. "Spartan deployment plan? 4 teams, 2 to ground support. I want Spartans at the choke points between the dead army and the first population centers, buying time for evacuation. 1 team on close air support from Pelicans, and 1 team with me. I'm going for the center." He looked at Roland. "I need every round of cryo ammunition we have. Everything that generates sustained cold. Scratch that. Everything that generates sustained heat. Thermal weapons. Incendiaries. Dragons run on the same principle." "Chief," Roland said carefully, "going into the center of that army with a 4-man Spartan team is tactically insane, yes," Chief said. "Flag it in the report." He went to Dragonstone first. Daenerys was already awake. She'd felt something, she said, and Chief had stopped being surprised by the things this world's people felt that his sensors couldn't quantify. She was standing at the war room window when he arrived, looking north, and she turned when he entered, with the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was waiting to see if the world would cooperate. "The wall," she said. "Yes." "How long?" "Enough time to do this right if we move now. Not enough time for politics." He put the holographic overlay on the painted table, Roland projecting through his gauntlet, the dead army's position rendered over the carved map of the continent in real-time thermal data. Daenerys looked at it with the focused stillness of a commander absorbing a battlefield. "I need your dragons in the northern theater, coordinated with my ship's fire support and my ground teams, not charging alone. Coordinated. I timed strikes to create separation in the army's formation so my team can reach the center." "The center," she repeated. "You're going after him." "If my analysis is right, he's the source of everything. Take him down and the army stops." "Men have tried." "Men without Mac cannons," Chief said. He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me with your dragons based on 3 days. I'm asking you to look at that image and tell me what the alternative is." She looked at the image for a long time, at the numbers, at the pace of the advance, at the villages in the path of the cold front that had no walls and no dragons and no help coming from a southern political class that was still, even now, sending ravens about terms and arrangements. "I'll fly myself," she said. Chief had expected an argument against that. He found, looking at her, that he didn't have one. She was the dragon as much as the creatures were. Separating her from the fight would cost more than it saved. "Stay high until I tell you otherwise," he said. "Don't engage until the formation breaks, and if something goes wrong with the ground insertion, I'll burn everything between you and the way out," she said. Simple. Absolute. The tone of someone who had made promises in fire before. The Infinity moved north under a sky that had stopped looking natural. The cold front had pushed far enough south now that it was visible to the naked eye. A wall of dark cloud moving against the prevailing wind, wrong in the way that Roland had flagged from the beginning, the temperature differential sharp enough to feel from the bridge viewport. Below, the landscape was changing. Green turning gray, rivers slowing at their edges. The villages in the dead army's path were empty. Roland's Spartan teams had been pushing evacuation for 6 hours, and most of the civilian population had moved, which was the closest thing to a clean variable Chief was going to get in this equation. The first engagement happened before the ground insertion. A Pelican-running Spartan team Kodiak on a flanking insertion came under attack from a wave of whites that had advanced faster than Roland's projections. The dead didn't tire, and Chief filed that as a reminder that every model had a margin of error. Kodiak's team leader, Lieutenant Commander Vera Santos, called it in with the flat professionalism of a Spartan who'd grown up fighting the Covenant and found that dead soldiers running at full sprint in unlimited numbers felt familiar in the worst possible way. Chief listened to the engagement over comm as his own Pelican pushed deeper north. Santos was handling it, the BR-85s cutting through the whites with the efficiency of weapons designed for hardened targets, encountering relatively fragile ones, and the discovery Roland had flagged holding true at the tactical level. Destroy the body sufficiently, and the animation failed. The dead could be killed again. It was just a question of ammunition and time, and the UNSC had engineered solutions to both. But the White Walkers were different. Santos reported contact with 2 of them on the eastern flank, and Chief heard the change in her voice. Not fear, but the recalibration of a professional encountering something that didn't respond to the expected input. Standard rounds weren't stopping them. Armor wasn't failing, but it wasn't stopping them either. The cold they generated dropping suit temperature readings in ways that weren't dangerous yet, but carried the implication of dangerous with enough exposure. Switch to incendiaries, Chief said over comm. Sustained heat, maximum output. Don't let them close. The sound of the engagement shifted. The White Walker signatures on Roland's overlay destabilized, then went dark. Fire worked. Of course it did. The ground insertion was 30 kilometers behind the front line of the dead army. Chief's team came down fast, Pelican running dark, Roland guiding them through a gap in the white formations identified from thermal imaging. 4 Spartans, Chief, and 3 from Team Obsidian, who'd fought from Reach to the Ark and back and didn't ask unnecessary questions. They hit the ground in a snowfield that had been a wheat farm a week ago and moved immediately. Chief running point. The dead were everywhere. Not everywhere in the way that the formation looked from 4,000 meters. From the ground, in the dark, with snow falling sideways in the cold front's wind. Everywhere meant something physical and immediate. They moved through gaps that Roland was threading in real time, calling adjustments through Chief's earpiece with the calm of an AI that had learned to manage battlefield chaos across 100 engagements. Turn left, 30 meters. The cluster ahead is moving northeast. Wait 8 seconds. Go. Chief trusted Roland's eyes because his own couldn't see everything. That was the partnership that had kept him alive through things that should have killed him. He moved, and Roland guided, and the Spartan team behind him matched his pace with the silent precision of soldiers who had trained for this level of coordination since childhood. The Night King's position was ahead. Roland had him fixed, cold signature unmistakable, moving at the army's center with the unhurried confidence of something that had never had cause to fear anything. Until now. Chief rounded a collapsed stone wall and saw him for the first time with his own eyes. Taller than a man, pale as the snow around him, the White Walkers flanking him turning toward Chief's position with the synchronized awareness of a command layer detecting an intrusion, and around them the dead army beginning to redirect, not in panic but in the deliberate reorientation of a distributed system, responding to a threat at its core. Chief raised his MA-5D and opened fire. The White Walker to the Night King's left took a full burst to the chest, staggered, not dead, but slowed, the rounds doing damage, even if they couldn't finish it. Chief was already moving, drawing the walker's attention, buying the half-second for Spartan Reyes on his left to put an incendiary round into the same target from a different angle. The White Walker detonated in a cascade of ice and light. The Night King turned, and Chief, for the first time in a very long engagement, felt the cold, not the ambient cold of the front. Something else, something directed, personal, a pressure that wasn't temperature but felt like it, pressing against his armor's systems, against his augmented physiology, against something deeper that Chief didn't have a name for, but that Roland immediately flagged as an unclassified energy interaction at a frequency his sensors had never encountered. "Chief?" Roland said, his voice carrying the precise calibration of someone who was alarmed and choosing to present it as data rather than emotion. The energy field is interfacing with your suit at a level I can't fully model. Whatever he's projecting, it's not just cold. It's something the armor wasn't designed to resist." "How long before it matters?" Chief asked, still moving, still firing. "Unknown. That's the problem." The Night King raised one hand. Overhead, the dead rose from the snow where Spartan Team Kodiak had dropped them on the eastern flank, bodies that had been destroyed, reanimating in the pulse of that gesture, to the network refreshing itself with the casual authority of something that had never considered the possibility of permanent loss. Chief looked at the rising dead, at the Night King, at the White Walkers moving to surround. He clicked his comm to the Infinity's tactical channel. "Roland, tell Palmer I need the fire support window now." "Already called," Roland said. 18 seconds. Chief looked at the Night King, who was looking at him with something that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite contempt, the expression of an ancient intelligence encountering something new in a world where nothing had been new for a very long time. 14 seconds, Roland said. The dead closed in. Chief held his ground. The Mac round hit 3 kilometers north of Chief's position, and the world turned white. The Infinity's Mark IV Mac cannon wasn't designed for surgical strikes. It was designed for cracking Covenant warships, hardened targets moving at speed in the vacuum of space, armored with energy shielding and meters of composite hull plating. Firing one at a medieval battlefield was the equivalent of using a warship's main gun to clear a room. Palmer had known that. She'd fired it anyway, because Chief had asked for the fire support window, and in 11 years of working alongside John 117, she had learned that when he asked for something in that tone, the alternative to providing it was worse than the collateral of the thing itself. The round impacted a ridgeline at a precise angle Roland had calculated to maximize lateral displacement. Not a direct hit on the Army's center, but a kinetic shockwave that rolled south across the snowfield like a physical wall, throwing the dead off their feet in a radius of 400 meters, disrupting the formation, buying seconds that Chief used with the economy of a man who understood that seconds were the only currency that mattered in a firefight. He was already moving when the shockwave hit, low, fast, angling toward the Night King's position through the chaos of displaced bodies and falling snow and the ringing silence that followed a Mac impact at close range. The White Walkers had staggered, were not destroyed. Whatever they were made of absorbed the kinetic displacement better than the Whites, but staggered, their formation broken, the precise geometry of their protective screen around the Night King temporarily fractured. Chief had one window. He took it. The Night King didn't move. That was the detail Chief registered as he closed the last 40 meters at a pace no unaugmented human could have matched. The ancient figure at the center of the dead army simply stood in the settling snow and watched him come, and the watching was its own kind of statement. An entity that had existed for thousands of years, that had never lost, that had absorbed every weapon this world had ever produced without slowing. It watched a gray-armored figure charging across a frozen field and chose not to step back. Chief had fought things that didn't fear him before. He'd learned that the absence of fear in an enemy was information, not comfort. He came in low and hit the Night King with a full tackle. Not a strike, a takedown, driving his armored shoulder into the figure's center mass. With every kilogram of Spartan augmentation and Mjolnir plating behind it. The impact was wrong. The Night King didn't crumple the way a human body would, didn't absorb force the way even an armored Covenant elite would. He moved, but stiffly, as if the concept of being moved was something he was processing rather than experiencing. Cold flooded through Chief's armor at the contact point. The temperature readings in his left pauldron dropping 30 degrees in 2 seconds. The material integrity warnings lighting amber in his HUD. He didn't hold the grapple. He used it. 2 seconds of contact, enough to drive the Night King back 2 steps, enough to disrupt whatever the ancient intelligence had been preparing, enough for Spartan Reyes to get a clean angle from the north. Reyes put a full magazine of incendiary rounds into the Night King's back at point-blank range. The fire bloomed across ancient pale armor, and the Night King made a sound that Chief felt more than heard. Low, resonant, wrong in a frequency that human ears weren't meant to process. A sound like the world expressing displeasure at something occurring within it. Not a death cry, but pain. Good. Chief rolled clear as 2 White Walkers converged on his position. Bear drew his combat knife, the Spartan-issue blade that had gone through Covenant armor at reach and Forerunner plating at Requiem, and drove it through the neck of the nearest one as it reached for him. The blade didn't kill it the way fire did, but it bought him a second. He used the second to put his sidearm against the White Walker's skull and fire 6 incendiary rounds in sequence, and the Walker came apart. Roland was running constant updates in his earpiece. Daenerys is in position overhead. Drogon is reading extremely agitated. I think he can sense the Night King's energy field. Recommend you create separation before she makes her attack run. Tell her 30 seconds, Chief said. He was bleeding from 2 places where the cold had found gaps in his armor's integrity and done something to the tissue beneath that wasn't quite frostbite and wasn't quite anything else. Roland's unclassified energy interaction manifesting as a physical cost that Chief acknowledged and filed away because the mission wasn't finished. The Night King had recovered from Reyes's incendiary barrage, was standing again, and the dead army was reorganizing around him with the systematic efficiency of a distributed network correcting after a disruption. But it was slower than before. Chief saw it and Roland confirmed it in the same moment. The reanimation rate was reduced. The precision of the White's movement degraded. The White Walker command layer down to 3 from the original 6. The network wasn't broken, but it was stressed. And a stressed system made errors. Reyes, Chief said, may the outcropping at your 9 o'clock put everything incendiary you have left into the ground between the Night King and his eastern flank. I want a fire line. Reyes laid it down without a word, a wall of burning chemical accelerant across the snow, catching on the frozen ground with the stubbornness of UNSC incendiary compounds, engineered to burn in vacuum, and they could certainly manage snow. The dead on the eastern side of the line stopped. They not out of self-preservation, they had none, but because the reanimation field weakened across the fire barrier, the Night King signaled degrading through the thermal interference. Roland had been right about the network. Chief turned back to the Night King and found the ancient figure looking at the fire line with something new in his expression. Not fear, because Chief didn't think the concept was available to him, but a recalculation, an acknowledgement perhaps for the first time in millennia, that the variables of a situation had moved outside his modeling. "Now," Chief said into the comm. Drogon came out of the dark sky like a second sun. Daenerys had been high, very high, higher than she normally flew, because Roland had advised it and she'd trusted the numbers, even if she didn't fully understand them. From that altitude, Drogon was a dark shape against darker clouds, invisible to anything on the ground that was looking at eye level. She came down in a dive that Chief tracked on his HUD through Roland's optical feed, the dragon's heat signature blazing as Drogon built toward the release point, and the Night King turned. He heard it, or felt it, the same way he seemed to feel everything in his domain, and raised his hand. Not fast enough. Daenerys pulled the dive at 200 meters, and Drogon screamed fire across the Night King's position in a sustained burst that turned the snowfield into a temporary approximation of a blast furnace. Chief was behind the outcropping with Reyes, visor polarized against the thermal bloom, armor taking the radiant heat across its outer surface and managing it. The White Walkers in the blast radius went apart, not slowly, not with the stubborn resistance they'd shown to kinetic rounds, but immediately, violently, the dragonfire interacting with whatever they were composed of, the way fire interacts with ice when enough heat is applied fast enough. The Night King stood in the fire. For 3 seconds he stood in it, and Chief thought with cold clarity that it might not be enough, that whatever the ancient figure was made of might be genuinely beyond the reach of this. And then Roland's voice came into his earpiece, steady and precise. "Chief, his field is collapsing. The distributed connection to the Whites is degrading across the full network. Whatever Drogon's fire is doing to him, it's working, but he's going to move. He's calculating an exit." Chief was already up and running. The Night King stepped out of the fire on the northern edge of the blast zone, and Chief met him there. No approach this time. No wind-up. Chief had 12 meters of distance and used it to build velocity and drove the combat knife into the junction between the Night King's neck and shoulder with every ounce of force his augmented frame could generate, the incendiary coating on the blade igniting on contact, the fire channeled into the wound from the inside. The Night King grabbed Chief's wrist. The cold hit like a physical impact, suit temperature readings plummeting, the amber warnings going red in 2 sections of his left arm, something in the grip that wasn't just strength but that awful frequency again, the one that felt like it was working on something the armor didn't cover. Chief held the knife in place and reached with his free hand and activated the thermal charge on his wrist unit, a breach tool, designed for cutting through Covenant hull plating. Not a weapon, but the heat output was the heat output, and pressed it flat against the Night King's chest. He triggered it. The detonation was small by max standards. By any other standard, it was significant. The thermal bloom was focused, directional, channeled into the Night King's body from contact range, and whatever the ancient figure had survived through millennia of this world's weapons, he had not been built to survive UNSC breach technology delivering sustained thermal energy at that range. The Night King came apart. Not like the White Walkers, not suddenly, not violently, slowly, with a kind of deliberate inevitability, like a structure that had been standing through will alone and had simply decided to stop. The cold field collapsed inward, the frequency vanished, and across the snowfield, across the valley, across the miles of territory where the dead army had been moving with mechanical certainty, the Whites stopped. All of them. At once. Then they fell. Chief stood in the snow and listened to the silence of several 100,000 bodies hitting the ground simultaneously, and the silence after it, which was the loudest thing he had heard in a very long time. His left arm was reporting tissue damage beneath the armor, 3 amber warnings on his HUD, 1 red. His ammunition was largely expended. He was standing in a field of collapsed dead in the dark, 4,000 meters below the Infinity, with fire dying around him and snow beginning to fall again. Normal snow this time, moving with the wind the way snow was supposed to move. Roland spoke quietly in his earpiece. "Chief, the cold front is dissipating. Temperature readings across the northern theater are normalizing." A pause. "It worked." "I know," Chief said. "Daenerys is circling overhead. She's asking if you're alive. Tell her yes." "She says," Roland paused again, and Chief had the distinct impression the AI was editing something for tone. "She says she would have appreciated a slightly clearer plan." Chief looked at the space where the Night King had stood, at the absence where the cold had been, at the sky above, clearing now as the front dissolved, stars appearing for the first time since they'd moved north. "The plan worked," he said. "I'll convey that." The Pelican came down in the silence, and Chief walked to it across the field of the fallen dead without looking back. He didn't look back at the snowfield, or at the collapsed army, or at the place where something ancient and terrible had finally run out of millennia. He looked north instead, at the gap in the wall still visible on Roland's overlay, at the pass through which the dead had poured, and through which, now, nothing moved. The architecture of the threat had ended, so the geography of it remained. He boarded the Pelican and sat, and Roland updated him on the other teams, Kodiak holding their position, casualties light, everyone functional, the evacuation columns moving back toward their villages now that the front had dissolved. Daenerys already descending, Drogon banking south, carrying the message of what had happened north of the wall, back toward a world that would need to decide what to do with the fact of it. On the Infinity's bridge, Palmer was already running the slipspace calculations. Roland reported her progress as the Pelican climbed, 40% through the modeling, the math becoming tractable now that they'd had the time and the processing cycles to work it properly. 20 hours, perhaps. Maybe less. A door back to their own universe, their own war, their own obligations that hadn't stopped existing simply because a forerunner anomaly had pulled them sideways through the fabric of space. The Chief looked at the map on the Pelican's display, at the continent below, at the south where King's Landing sat behind its walls, and Cersei Lannister was almost certainly being told by a breathless raven that the dead army had collapsed overnight and the Sky God's metal ship had done it. At the political machinery already spinning up to process that information and extract advantage from it, because that was what the political machinery of this world did, and no single night of decisive action was going to change the fundamental nature of what ruled it. He thought about Tyrion, who understood that gap between what people were and what they could be, with a precision that was its own kind of intelligence. He thought about Daenerys, who had given him her dragon's fire based on 3 days of acquaintance and a thermal map, because the math left no other reasonable choice. He thought about the wall, still breached, still open. The Night King was gone, but the passage he'd used to enter the world of the living remained, and the things that had existed beyond it before the Night King had organized them into an army didn't simply stop existing because their commander had. He clicked his comm to the ship channel. "Roland, when you have the slipspace window modeled, flag it, but don't open it immediately." A pause. "Chief? There are things I want to confirm before we leave." "The breach in the wall," Roland said. "Not a question." "And what's beyond it?" Chief said. "We spent 3 days on this world, and we stopped one threat. I want to know what else is coming before we go home and can't come back." The Pelican broke cloud cover and the Infinity filled the viewport above. Enormous, gray, impossible. The one thing in this world that moved at a speed the world couldn't follow. And Chief looked at it the way he always looked at the ship, as a tool, a responsibility, a crew that had followed him through a dimensional rupture and fought a war that wasn't theirs and deserved to go home. They would go home, but not until he was sure they'd actually finished what they'd started. Below, the continent stretched south in the dark, and Westeros exhaled, and the night, for the first time in longer than anyone living could remember, was simply the night. The dead had fallen, but the world they'd threatened hadn't found stability yet. The breach in the wall stood open against the northern sky, an unresolved wound in the geography of the continent, and beyond it lay territories that even the Night King's organized malice had only partially accounted for. Chief had been a soldier long enough to know that removing the greatest threat rarely meant there was no threat remaining. It usually meant the second greatest threat was now the greatest. And in a world this old and this complicated, second place was crowded. Daenerys Targaryen had a continent to reclaim and a throne to contest, and 2 dragons where she'd had 3, and she'd looked at the infinity in the sky above Dragonstone with an expression that Chief recognized as the face of someone calculating a future that no longer followed the map she'd drawn before an impossible warship fell out of the sky and changed the variables. Tyrion had begun composing ravens before the Pelican had even touched down on the return flight. So the political architecture of the post-Night King world already being assembled in his methodical and unsentimental mind. The great houses would respond. They always did. The Iron Throne hadn't become less significant because something worse had been defeated. It had become more contested because the power that had kept every lord in the south looking north instead of sideways was gone, and sideways was where the real dangers in this world had always lived. The Chief sat in the Infinity's briefing room with Roland's latest slipspace projection on the table, and knew with the certainty of a man who had seen enough wars to understand their shape, that this night's work, clean and decisive as it had been, was one chapter in a story that had more of them ahead. The galaxy, his galaxy and this one, had always worked that way. Roland's voice came through the room's speakers with the quiet evenness of an AI that had learned to deliver information without editorializing and didn't always manage it. Chief, the slipspace window is achievable in 16 hours. Your call. Chief looked at the breach in the wall on the overlay, at the southern continent already beginning to move. 16 hours, he said. Make them count. May the Force be with you. More stories await.